The jungle did not sleep that night. It only breathed, slow, uneven, like something wounded that refused to die. Warm wind crawled over the fields, carrying the sour scent of burnt rice and kerosene. Every gust brought the low drone of engines from somewhere far beyond the hills, echoes of machines that never rested. Now only smoke remained, coiling up into the black sky like questions no one could answer. He stared at his palms. They were coated with ash. Somewhere inside the ash was skin. Somewhere inside the skin was someone who used to smile easily. He wondered if that person still existed, or if the war had traded him away without permission. From the far side of the yard came a voice, Sergeant Cole, low, rasped, carrying authority even in a whisper. "Keep your head up, Miller." "We move at first light." Ethan nodded, though the man couldn't see him. The sergeant's shadow passed between the lamps, followed by Reeves and Patterson. They were laughing about something that wasn't funny, the kind of laugh men use when silence becomes unbearable. He looked past them toward the river that cut through the village. It glimmered faintly under the starlight, a thin wound, still bleeding light. Frogs had started again, tentative, as if testing whether the war was finally done. It wasn't. The war was never done. It just moved a few steps down the road and waited. Ethan closed his eyes and saw his mother's porch in Missouri, the dog asleep at her feet, the smell of cedar after rain. For one fragile heartbeat, he almost felt safe. Then someone kicked a tin can across the yard and the world folded back into itself, a loud, ugly reminder that he was still here. When he opened his eyes, Reeves and Patterson were at the doorway of a burned-out hut. A small light flickered inside, an oil lamp still alive among the ruins. Cole motioned them forward. Ethan followed because that's what soldiers did. They followed. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of wet smoke and old wood. A figure crouched in the corner, arms wrapped around her knees. A girl, barely older than a child. Her face caught the light only for a second, and in that second Ethan saw everything the day had broken. Cole's voice dropped even lower. "Bring her out." Reeves moved first. His boots scraped across the floorboards. Patterson hesitated, but obeyed. The girl didn't fight. She rose slowly, eyes hollow, mouth sealed. When she stepped outside, the wind took her hair and threw it across her face like a curtain she no longer needed. Ethan followed them into the courtyard. The moon had come out, thin and colorless. It made the broken roofs look like the ribs of some enormous animal left to rot. Cole gestured toward a stool near the well. "Sit her there." The girl did not sit. She only looked at the ground. "Sit her down," Cole repeated. His tone carried no anger, only exhaustion. That made it worse. Ethan could feel something changing, an invisible tide pulling the night toward a place he didn't want to see. His stomach turned cold. He stepped closer. "Sergeant, maybe we should move out. There's nothing here." Cole didn't answer. Reeves muttered something Ethan didn't catch. Laughter again, nervous and thin. Then a silence that seemed to wait for permission. Ethan's breath shortened. "We can't," he began. Cole looked at him, tired eyes under a dirt-streaked helmet. "You want command, Miller?" "No, sir. I just—" "Then stand down." The words hit harder than a blow. "Stand down." As if morality were a switch you could turn off when the night demanded it. Ethan felt the weight of every order he'd ever been given settle onto his spine. The part of him that believed in rules wanted to obey. The part that still remembered his mother's voice wanted to run. Between the two, there was only trembling. Reeves crouched beside the girl, said something in a tone that might have been comfort if not for the smirk at the edge of it. Patterson looked away, jaw tight. Cole paced once, muttering about getting intel, though everyone knew there was no intel left to get. The air itself was empty. Ethan stepped forward again. "Sergeant, please." Cole's hand shot out, stopping him with a single push to the chest. Not violent, just final. "You don't see anything tonight, Miller." "You understand?" He didn't answer. The silence was answer enough. The lamp flickered. The wind shifted. The world tilted into something dark and irreversible. He couldn't move. Every muscle locked in place while his mind screamed for his body to act. But fear had a stronger grip. It pressed him down until he could only watch shadows against the far wall, shapes without names, motions that sounded like breathing in the wrong rhythm. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The only sound left was the hiss of the lamp and the soft sobbing of wind through the broken palm leaves. Ethan realized he was on his knees. His helmet had rolled somewhere into the dark. His fingers were bleeding where nails had cut into skin. Reeves stood off to the side, shoulders heaving. Patterson leaned against the wall, face gray. Cole adjusted his gear like a man finishing a chore. The girl sat motionless, her head bowed. The lamplight drew a small circle around her, a fragile boundary between her and everything that had just happened. Ethan tried to speak, but the words came out as dust. "I'm sorry," he whispered. He wasn't sure who he said it to. Her, himself, God, or the night. None of them replied. Cole gave the order to pack up. Men began to move, collecting their weapons, checking straps, avoiding each other's eyes. Reeves lit a cigarette that shook in his hand. Smoke drifted into the lamp's halo and vanished. Ethan found his helmet, brushed off the dirt. His chest felt hollow, as if someone had taken the heart out and left the echo. He turned once more toward the girl. She was staring at the ground, lips moving in a whisper too soft to reach him. He imagined it was a prayer, not for mercy, but for memory, so that someone would remember what this night had done. He wanted to help her. He wanted to stay, to undo something, anything. But his feet obeyed the orders his soul refused. He followed the others into the darkness beyond the village. The path wound through the fields, glistening with water that mirrored the moon. Frogs croaked again, steady and indifferent. The smell of smoke thinned until it was only memory. Reeves hummed under his breath, a tune without melody. Cole spoke into the radio, requesting extraction at dawn. Patterson said nothing at all. Ethan walked last. Every step felt borrowed. He tried to recall a prayer, any prayer, but the words had rusted in his mouth. The only thing left was a picture of home and the faint echo of a girl's breathing behind him. When they reached the open clearing, the helicopters were already waiting. Two green beasts crouched in the tall grass, rotors turning slow, heavy with rain. The wind from the blades whipped dust into their faces. Cole signaled. One by one, the men climbed aboard. Ethan hesitated. The village lay behind him, a smear of smoke against the horizon. Somewhere within that smoke, the lamp was still burning. He knew it. He could feel its light like a wound between his ribs. He tore it out, folded it once, and pressed it against the photograph of home before tucking both back into his pocket. "Move, kid," Reeves shouted over the engines. Ethan climbed aboard. The door slammed. The machine lifted, the ground shrinking away until the river became a thread of silver, the village a shadow swallowed by dawn. He looked down through the open door. Smoke drifted upward, chasing the helicopter like a ghost unwilling to let go. Reeves was talking. Cole was already on the radio. Patterson had closed his eyes. Ethan turned his head toward the window, away from them all. The sky ahead was red with sunrise and ash. He pressed his trembling hand against the glass and whispered to no one, "I'm still here." The wind took the words and tore them apart before they reached the air outside. Below, the lamp in the ruins kept burning. The helicopter rose into the reddening sky, carrying 12 men, and the kind of silence that does not break even when shouted over. Ethan sat near the open doorway, boots hanging above the blur of trees. Wind tore through the cabin, whipping at his hair, flattening the sweat on his neck into cold salt. No one spoke. Reeves chewed on a toothpick that wasn't there. Patterson stared straight ahead, his eyes wide but empty, the look of someone watching a movie only he could see. Sergeant Cole leaned into the radio, muttering coordinates. His voice was low, efficient, perfectly steady, as if steadiness itself could erase what had been done. Below them, the land spread out in patches of green and gray. Rivers curved through the mist like veins beneath bruised skin. Villages flickered by, small rectangles of tin, straw, and smoke. Somewhere down there, the lamp was still burning, refusing to die. Ethan couldn't take his eyes off it, or rather, the place he imagined it still was. That small square of light inside the ruin, fragile as a heartbeat. He whispered to himself, "She's alive." It wasn't hope. It was a sentence he needed to believe in to keep from falling apart. The chopper jolted as it hit a pocket of wind. Reeves swore under his breath. Patterson crossed himself, quick, guilty, as if ashamed of faith. Ethan's fingers dug into the frame of the doorway until his knuckles went white. Every vibration of the rotors seemed to echo inside his skull. He closed his eyes and saw flashes. The courtyard, the stool, the girl's bowed head, the sound the night had made when it broke. He opened them again and looked at his hands. They were shaking. They had been since the village. He pressed them together, palm to palm, the way his mother used to do before prayer. But there were no words left that fit inside him, only the noise of the rotors and the smell of gun oil and rain. Hours later, they landed at the base. The ground was a pale smear of dust and concrete, bordered by tents that flapped like tired lungs. A radio crackled somewhere near the mess hall. Someone laughed. Too loud. Too soon. Cole dismounted first, his boots hitting the dirt with a practiced certainty. "Debrief in 10, he said. "You all know the drill." Reeves nodded, already lighting another cigarette. Patterson didn't move. Ethan climbed down last, feeling the earth shift beneath him as if it too wanted distance. The sun was high now, harsh and colorless. It painted everything in tones of fatigue. Trucks passed, engines coughing black fumes into the heat. The air shimmered. He could hear the sound of typewriters from the command tent, the mechanical rhythm of men recording the things they'll later deny remembering. He made his way to the supply hut, traded his empty canteen for a full one, and sat on a crate behind the building. The canteen was cool against his palm. He took one sip, then stopped. The taste of metal lingered, the same as before. He reached into his chest pocket and took out the photograph. His mother, the porch, the dog. The porch light glowed faintly in the dusk behind her, so harmless, so permanent. He stared at it until the edges blurred. Then he took the folded paper, the one with 2 words he'd written on the helicopter. "Forgive me." He didn't know what to do with it. He wanted to burn it, but that would make the air smell like confession. He wanted to keep it, but that would mean admitting there was something to forgive. So he tucked it behind the photograph, like a secret too heavy to say out loud. From somewhere inside the camp, someone started a generator. The sound rose and fell, mechanical and steady. He wished his mind could hum like that, clean, predictable, without ghosts. When night came, he didn't sleep. He lay on his cot in the dim tent, listening to rain hit the canvas roof. Each drop felt like a clock tick, marking the seconds between who he had been and who he was now. The others slept quickly, men trained to shut the world off like a switch. Reeves snored. Patterson mumbled a prayer in his sleep. Cole moved restlessly in his bunk, turning over as if chased by dreams too heavy to hold still. Ethan watched the light from a nearby lamp flicker on the canvas. He thought of the lamp in the village again, how it had swayed, how the flame had bent but never gone out. He thought of the girl's face in that trembling light and how he hadn't been able to look away. When he finally closed his eyes, the light followed him inside. It moved behind his eyelids, a pulse that would not stop. 3 days later, orders came, rotation back to Da Nang for reassignment. Cole gave the announcement in his usual clipped tone, like reading from a manual. Reeves looked relieved. Patterson just nodded. Ethan said nothing. His heart felt too loud in his chest. They boarded a transport truck before dawn. The road wound through hills slick with mist. Villages passed like ghosts, silent, colorless, staring back at them. Ethan kept his rifle across his knees, but never looked at it. He thought of the girl again. He imagined her alive, walking through the fields, maybe holding the lamp. He imagined her not hating him, even though she should. When they reached Da Nang, the air smelled of salt and oil. Planes lined the tarmac like waiting vultures. Men moved everywhere, loading crates, shouting orders, pretending the world still made sense. Ethan stepped down and felt the heat hit him full in the face. It was the kind of heat that didn't burn, it smothered. He found the waiting area near the hangar. Rows of metal chairs, a rusted fan that turned too slowly, a soldier asleep with his head against his bag. He sat down, holding his duffel between his knees. Inside it were three things: a damp uniform, a broken watch, and the photograph with the folded paper. Everything else he had left behind, willingly or not. He took a seat by the window. Outside, the air shimmered with jet fuel. A mechanic wiped his hands on a rag and gave a signal to the tower. The engines began to hum. Ethan rested his forehead against the glass. The reflection that looked back at him didn't feel like his own. The eyes were older, the mouth a stranger's. He reached into his pocket and touched the photo again. His fingers brushed over the folded paper behind it. Those two words that felt heavier than any bullet he'd ever carried. "Forgive me." He whispered them once, testing how they sounded in the air. The noise of the engines swallowed them immediately. Maybe that was mercy. The plane rolled forward, gathered speed. The ground blurred. Tents, trucks, sandbags, the horizon. And then they were airborne. The coastline fell away beneath the wings, swallowed by a sea that glittered with morning. He looked down and saw the reflection of the sun on the waves. For a moment, it reminded him of the lamp again, the same color, the same trembling insistence to exist. He wondered if she was still alive, if the lamp had survived the wind, if she would ever know that one of the men who had ruined her night had tried and failed to save her. Clouds gathered beneath them, thick and white. The land disappeared. He thought of Missouri, of the porch, the sound of cicadas, his mother calling him in for supper. He tried to remember the smell of summer rain, but the memory refused to come. All he could smell was smoke. Somewhere over the South China Sea he opened his notebook again. The paper fluttered in the cabin air. He wrote without looking down, "If I make it home, I will tell the truth, even if no one listens." Then he closed the notebook, folded it, and pressed it to his chest. His heartbeat thudded beneath it, slow, uncertain, human. The engines droned. Men shifted in their seats. One of them, Reeves, offered him a stick of gum. Ethan took it, nodded thanks, but never unwrapped it. As the plane tilted, sunlight spilled through the window and lit his hands. He stared at them for a long time. They were steady now, clean. The dirt had been washed off, but the skin remembered. He turned his palms upward, as if expecting to see the night still written there. Maybe it was. Maybe it always would be. The plane landed. Applause from a few men who still believed in endings. Ethan didn't move. He sat there until the aisle cleared, then stood and followed the line toward the exit. Before stepping out, he looked once more through the small round window. The sea stretched endlessly below the sky, calm, empty, almost forgiving. He whispered again, this time not for God or the girl or the world, but for himself. "I don't know who I am anymore." And with that, he stepped out into the heat of a new country, carrying a single folded note in his pocket and a silence that would last for decades. The year was 1994. Along the Perfume River, fog drifted low and slow, like something unsure it wanted to leave. Boats moved through it like ghosts searching for their names. Mai walked beside the river each morning before work, shoes brushing dust from the narrow path. She liked how the world sounded softer when wrapped in mist. At 25, she had learned to survive by being quiet, by shrinking herself until she fit into the shape of other people's comfort. At night, Mai often heard her mother wake. The floor creaked, then the sound of a box being unwrapped, a soft click of wood, then nothing, just the stillness of someone remembering alone. Mai had never seen what was inside that box. She didn't ask. In their house, questions were like locked doors. You learned to walk past them without touching the handle. One afternoon, an envelope arrived at the library where Mai worked. Thin paper, foreign stamp. Her hands trembled before she even opened it. The letter inside was short. She'd received a scholarship to study in America. A full year. Paid. She read it 3 times, afraid the words might vanish if she blinked. Her English was good enough to understand everything, but not good enough to believe it. Inside was a torn photograph. A young woman stood before a burned house, oil lamp behind her, eyes unreadable. Below the image, in English, was a sentence that Lan couldn't read but had memorized all the same. "Forgive me." Lan placed the picture into Mai's hands. "Ju Lei," she said. "Keep it." Her voice sounded tired, not from the day, but from years. Oregon smelled of pine, rain, and distance. The town was small, framed by mountains and the quiet patience of trees. Mai rented a room near the university. The wallpaper peeled in the corners and the heater rattled like a nervous animal, but the window opened toward sky, and that was enough. She arrived at the campus early every morning, always the first in the classroom, the last to leave. She studied migration, identity, and history, trying perhaps to explain herself without saying me. Her advisor, an old professor with kind eyes, suggested she visit the Veterans Center. "Talk to them," he said. "They remember things books don't." The building was small, almost hidden between 2 maple trees. A sign out front read, "Center for Veterans and Oral History." When she stepped inside, a bell chimed softly above the door. The smell hit her first. Coffee, dust, old paper. The walls were lined with photographs, young soldiers frozen in a time they probably wished they could forget. A woman at the front desk smiled. "You must be Mai. Ethan's expecting you." Mai hesitated. "Ethan?" "Ethan Miller. Director here." The woman's smile softened. "He's kind. You'll like him." Mai walked to the open office door. Inside, sunlight through blinds, a wooden desk scarred by years of elbows, a mug of coffee cooling beside a stack of reports. A man stood up as she entered. Late 40s, tall, with the kind of weariness that doesn't invite pity. His hair was silver at the edges, his face weathered but calm. And his eyes, blue, clear, yet carrying something heavy behind them. "Mai," he said. "I'm Ethan." She nodded politely. "Nice to meet you, sir." He smiled faintly. "Just Ethan. Titles don't do much for me." He asked about her project. She explained. Her research on displacement, cultural memory, and how people carry the places they've lost. Her English faltered once, but his silence helped her find the words again. When she finished, he said quietly, "That's a brave thing to study." She shrugged. "Maybe I just want to understand why people forget." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Forgetting and forgiving, sometimes they wear the same coat. She didn't understand the full meaning, but the tone stayed with her. He gave her a small orientation, showing the shelves of tapes, boxes labeled with names and dates, Vietnam, Korea, Desert Storm. He moved carefully, like someone who had once been reckless and had learned the price. At the end of the tour, he said, "You'll find more truth in these voices than in any archive. Some of it's ugly, but truth usually is." She began visiting the center every week. Most afternoons she sat at a wooden table with a pair of headphones, listening to men speak from inside magnetic tape. The voices cracked, paused, started again. They talked about rain that smelled like gunpowder, about the sound of helicopters that never really left the head, about the faces they couldn't forget no matter how long they'd tried. Sometimes she cried quietly without knowing why. Ethan noticed. He didn't ask. He simply placed a cup of coffee near her elbow and walked away. Days became weeks. Their small conversations grew longer. Weather, books, the strange kindness of strangers. She told him about Hugh, about the river that moved slow even when the world didn't. He told her about Missouri, his mother's porch, the sound of crickets, the smell of cedar after rain. They didn't talk about the war, not yet. Sometimes she caught him staring out the window, lost somewhere too far to reach. Sometimes his hands trembled slightly when he touched old photographs. When that happened, he would excuse himself, pretending to check the copier or refill his coffee. One afternoon, rain began early. The center emptied, leaving them alone. Mai stood by the bulletin board reading a flyer. Ethan came to stand beside her. The sound of rain filled the silence between them. "You'll do well at this," he said. "At what?" she asked. "At listening," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "It's easier than speaking." He nodded. "Sometimes it's the only way to speak." For a moment, neither moved. Then he took an umbrella from the stand and handed it to her. "Here. Oregon's a liar. It rains when you least expect it." "I'll return it tomorrow," she said. He shook his head. "No need." "Keep it." Then quieter. "We hold on to too many things that hurt. Might as well keep something that helps." She thanked him, then stepped out into the rain. The sound of the door closing behind her lingered longer than it should have. She traced the letters with her fingertip until they blurred. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, almost gentle. She wondered what kind of man would write such a thing. Then she thought of Ethan's hands, steady, careful, like someone afraid of breaking what was already fragile. She shook the thought away, ashamed of herself for even thinking it. The rain outside grew heavier, washing against the glass like a memory trying to get in. When she finally slept, the dream came. A courtyard, smoke, a boy kneeling in the dirt, his hands open as if begging the night to explain itself. A lamp swinging overhead, its light trembling, and a voice, hers or someone else's, whispering through the dark, "Forgive me." She woke before dawn, breath caught between ribs. The room smelled faintly of rain and pine. She pressed her palms together and whispered the words again, not knowing why. By morning, she'd convinced herself it was just a dream. But when she walked into the center that afternoon and met Ethan's eyes across the room, something inside her paused. For a heartbeat, she felt as if she'd already known him once, long ago, in a place where the air smelled of smoke and the night refused to forget. Autumn came early to Oregon. The hills turned the color of rusted copper, and rain began to fall without asking permission. The Veterans Center grew quieter with each passing week. Students drifted away after midterms. Even the staff spoke softer, as if not to disturb the slow surrender of leaves outside. Mai stayed. She liked the hush, the way silence in that building felt almost sacred, like the space between one confession and the next. Some days she listened to the old tapes until her ears rang. Other days she simply sat and read the transcriptions, tracing her finger along faded lines of type. The stories blurred together, different names, same rain, same fear. And always, the lamps. Ethan worked nearby, sometimes at his desk, sometimes helping another veteran fill out paperwork. He had a stillness that made noise behave itself. When he smiled, it was small and tired, but it reached his eyes. He spoke gently, as if testing every word before releasing it. Mai began to notice small things about him. The way his right hand shook slightly when he lifted a mug. The way he avoided loud sounds, closing his eyes briefly whenever a door slammed. The way he hesitated each time the word Vietnam appeared in conversation, as if the country itself might overhear. One afternoon she told him about her research proposal, how she wanted to write about inherited silence, the way children carry their parents' unfinished sentences. He listened, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "That's a brave subject," he said. "I don't think bravery has much to do with it," she replied. "It's just the only thing that feels honest." He nodded slowly. "Honest is harder than brave." Rain pressed against the window, making shadows move across his face. For a moment, the light caught his eyes just right, and she saw a depth there she didn't understand. Something tender, something frightened. That night, Mai walked home through drizzle. The umbrella he'd given her tilted slightly against the wind. The air smelled of pine and wet metal. By the time she reached her apartment, her thoughts had tangled. Fragments of voices, her mother's silence, Ethan's face under gray light. She placed the picture back inside but couldn't bring herself to close the lid. Weeks passed. They began having coffee together after hours, sitting by the window as dusk folded the sky. Ethan told her stories that started nowhere and ended softly, about the dog he had as a boy, about fishing trips that never caught anything, about the way his mother used to hum when she thought no one was listening. Sometimes she would answer with her own fragments, how the smell of river mud could bring her to tears, how she had once wanted to be a teacher but decided history was a safer place to hide. They didn't name what was happening between them. It was too quiet for that. It was just presence. Two lives orbiting the same ache without knowing its name. But the distance between them grew thinner each day. One evening, Ethan walked her home. The rain had stopped. The streets glistened under yellow lamps. At her doorstep, she thanked him and turned to go, but he said her name softly, "Mai," and she froze. The way he said it was strange, gentle, almost reverent. For a moment, she thought she saw tears in his eyes, but he looked away quickly, murmured, "Good night," and walked off into the fog. That night she couldn't sleep. She dreamed again of the courtyard, the same lamp, the same smoke, the same boy kneeling in dirt. Only this time she saw his face clearly. It was Ethan's. She woke with a start, breath shaking, the taste of ash in her mouth. At the center the next day she watched him more carefully. He looked pale, distracted, as if something from the night had followed him into daylight. She almost asked if he was all right, but stopped. The answer was already visible in the tremor of his hands. Later that afternoon, she was helping sort photographs in the archive, black and white prints from different units, dated by year. 1967, 1968, 1969. She froze. The numbers blurred. Her fingers hesitated over a small envelope labeled Vietnam, Central Region, 1969. Her heart stuttered. She set the photo down, suddenly breathless. Just then, Ethan's voice came from the doorway. "Everything okay?" She turned, forcing calm. "Yes, just organizing by date." He picked up the photo, his thumb brushing the torn edge, and said quietly, "That one shouldn't be in this box. It belongs in storage." Before she could reply, he slid it back into the envelope and closed it. Some things don't need to be looked at twice. His tone was gentle but final. When he walked away, Mai stood there, frozen. The words 1969 Central Region echoed in her mind. That was the year her mother stopped talking about the past. Her breath faltered. That evening, she called her mother. The line crackled. Lan's voice came through faint, as if crossing not just miles but years. They talked about small things, the harvest, the roof leaking again. Then Mai asked, "Me, the photograph you gave me. When was it taken?" Long silence, then a sigh. "You already know, Con." 1969, another pause. "Yes." Mai swallowed hard. "Did you ever know who took it?" Lan didn't answer at first, then quietly. "Sometimes knowing is not peace. Sometimes it's another war." The line went dead. Mai sat there for a long time, phone in hand, listening to the hum of distance. The next day, she didn't go to class. She went straight to the center. Ethan was in his office writing something by hand. When he saw her, he smiled faintly. "You're early." She forced a smile. "Couldn't sleep." He gestured to the chair. "That happens to the best of us." She sat. The silence between them was heavier than usual. Finally, she asked, "Ethan, where were you stationed?" "During the war." His hand paused above the paper. "Why?" "I'm just curious." He leaned back, looking out the window. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said softly, "Central Vietnam. 1969. Her chest tightened. "Which province?" He hesitated. Quang Tri, a small village east of the river. It's not on any map anymore. She stared at him, unable to speak. The room seemed smaller, the air thinner. He turned back toward her, and their eyes met. In his, she saw something collapse, like a door being shut from inside. "Why do you ask?" he said. She shook her head quickly. "No reason, just part of research." He nodded, but the lie hung between them, visible as smoke. That night, Ethan sat alone at his kitchen table. The rain had stopped. The house was too quiet. He opened a shoebox from the bottom of a drawer, old medals, a watch, a folded paper, and a photograph. The same photograph Mai had. Only his was whole. The girl in the picture stood before a burned house, eyes dark and steady. His handwriting below the image read, "Forgive me, 1969. He stared at it until the edges blurred. He had carried it through every posting, every move, every sleepless night. He'd told himself he kept it to remember. But the truth was simpler. He kept it because he didn't know how to let go. He set the photo down and covered his face with both hands. The silence of the house pressed against him until he could hear his pulse. Somewhere, deep in his chest, he knew. The girl's daughter had found him, and fate, patient as rust, had finally closed its circle. He sat there until dawn, staring at the line he'd written 25 years ago. "Forgive me." The words hadn't changed, only the faces had. Winter came quietly that year. Snow dusted the hills like a hesitant memory, and the town folded itself into silence. Streets emptied earlier. Even the river moved slower under the frost. At the Veterans Center, Mai worked later than usual. Ethan did too. They spoke less now. Their conversations had grown careful, like steps on thin ice. The warmth between them hadn't disappeared. It had simply learned to hide. Mai could feel something unspoken moving beneath every word. She wanted to ask, to tear the silence open, but fear held her back. She had built her new life on a fragile peace. She wasn't ready to see what lay underneath. One afternoon, she found Ethan sitting alone in the listening room. A tape was running, but he wasn't wearing headphones. The voice of an old soldier filled the space. A man describing a village burned to the ground, the smell of kerosene, the scream of engines fading into rain. Ethan's eyes were closed. Mai stood quietly until he noticed her. He smiled faintly. "Didn't hear you come in." "I didn't want to interrupt." "It's fine," he said, reaching forward to stop the tape. The machine clicked, and the room fell still again. She wanted to tell him about her dreams, how they came more often now, how she woke each time with her hands shaking, the word forgive whispering in her head. But she didn't. Some confessions, she thought, should stay in the body. Instead, she asked softly, "Do you ever go back?" His eyes opened. "To Vietnam?" "Yes." He looked at her for a long time, as if measuring whether she would survive the truth. "No," he said finally. "Some places don't want you back." She nodded, though she didn't understand. Her fingers brushed the edge of the desk. For a moment she thought about showing him the torn photograph, asking the question that burned behind her ribs. But she folded her hands instead. Snow fell harder that week. Roads turned quiet, muffled under white. Ethan began canceling appointments, saying he needed time to sort the archives. Mai offered to help. He refused at first, then gave in. "Only if you don't mind the mess," he said. His house sat on the edge of town, small, wooden, painted the color of fog. The porch creaked like an old habit. Inside smelled of paper and coffee and something faintly metallic, perhaps regret made domestic. Books lined the walls, old photographs in simple frames, a record player that hadn't been used in years. "Sorry about the clutter," he said. "It's peaceful," she replied. He smiled at that, but it didn't reach his eyes. They spent the afternoon sorting boxes, old files, cassette tapes, notebooks filled with names and places. Mai worked on the floor, legs crossed, hands careful with every page. Ethan brewed coffee and hummed under his breath, An old tune, off-key but soft. At one point, he left the room to answer a call. She kept working. When she reached for another folder, the corner of a box caught her wrist. The lid shifted, and something inside slid out. A small, faded photograph, face down. She picked it up without thinking. The moment she turned it over, her breath left her. A woman, Vietnamese, standing before a burned house, an oil lamp behind her. The handwriting beneath was the same words, the same hand. Forgive me. 1969. Her hands trembled. The world narrowed to the size of that single image. Her mother's face, her mother's eyes, her mother's youth. She felt the air collapse inside her lungs. The house around her blurred. The sound of the clock, the smell of coffee, the faint hum of the heater. None of it reached her. She heard Ethan's footsteps returning. Quickly, she slipped the photo into her palm, hiding it behind the folder. Her heartbeat was a fist against her ribs. "You all right?" he asked, setting down his mug. She nodded, forcing a smile that tasted like iron. "Just dust," she said. He didn't notice her shaking. Or maybe he did, and chose mercy over question. The rest of the afternoon moved like glass. Words broke easily. She left early, claiming she had papers to finish. Outside, the cold bit into her, but she barely felt it. She walked through the snow until her legs ached. The world around her was white, empty, endless, and she couldn't tell if she was freezing or burning. When she reached her apartment, she shut the door and stood in the dark, breathing hard. Then she took the torn photograph from the wooden box. She placed it beside the one from Ethan's house. Two halves, one picture. The edges matched perfectly. The tear lines met like scars that had been waiting for each other for 25 years. Mai sank to her knees. She tried to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Only silence, the kind that howls behind the ribs. She stared at the two halves until the words blurred together. "Forgive me." Now she knew whose handwriting it was. She didn't go to the center the next day, or the next. Ethan called once. She let it ring. He left a message, his voice careful, uncertain. "Mai, I hope you're all right. I don't know if I said something wrong. If I did, I'm sorry. Just call when you can." She listened once, then deleted it. For 3 days she barely ate, barely moved. Her mother's face haunted every corner of the room. The photographs lay side by side on the table, joined, accusing. She wanted to hate him. She tried. But between the fury and the grief, something more complicated grew. Pity, confusion, even a kind of mourning for the fragile gentleness he had shown her before she knew. On the fourth night, she dreamed again. A courtyard. Smoke. The boy kneeling in the dirt. He looked up this time, and the face was clear, lined, older, the same eyes she'd come to trust. When she woke, dawn was pale against the window. She sat up slowly, her throat dry. She understood then that silence wouldn't protect her anymore. By the end of the week, she returned to the center. The doorbell chimed like nothing had changed. Ethan was inside, sorting files. When he saw her, he froze, the way someone does when their body recognizes danger before their mind does. "Mai," he said quietly. "I was starting to worry." She didn't answer. She walked past him, straight to his desk, and placed the two halves of the photograph on the wood. The sound of paper meeting the table was small, barely a sound at all, but it carried through the room like thunder. Where did you get this?" he whispered. Her voice was flat. "You already know." He sank into his chair. The color drained from his face. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, as if language itself had betrayed him. The silence between them thickened. The clock ticked somewhere far away. Finally, he said, "I was there." The words hung like smoke. Mai didn't breathe. "I was 19, he said, his voice cracking on the number. "There was a village. A patrol. Things went wrong." She stepped back, shaking. "Things." "I tried to stop them," he said too quickly, as if speed could make it true. "I swear I dash. "Stop!" Her voice broke. "Don't." He did. She picked up the photograph, both halves now whole, and stared at it. "That's my mother." Ethan's eyes closed. "I know." Her throat closed around the words. "And I'm her daughter." He nodded once, slow, heavy, as if confirming a punishment long expected. For a moment, neither spoke. The room seemed to tilt, light sliding off the walls. Then she whispered, "All this time? You didn't know?" "No," he said. "Not until now." She wanted to believe him. Part of her did. But another part, the one that had lived under stares and whispers her whole life, refused. She turned toward the door. "I shouldn't have come here." Please." She paused but didn't look back. "You said some places don't want you back. Maybe this is one of them." And then she left. The bell over the door chimed once, then silence. The door shut behind her. The bell above it gave a single chime, thin, metallic, and final. Ethan didn't move. He stayed seated, staring at the space where she'd stood. The air seemed to have collapsed, leaving the room smaller, denser, unfit for breath. The two halves of the photograph lay on his desk, joined for the first time in 25 years. He reached for it slowly, as if touching something sacred or cursed. Lan's face stared back at him, younger, unbroken. The same lamp glowed behind her shoulder, the same burned house, the same plea in his own handwriting curling beneath. "Forgive me, 1969. He pressed his thumb against the torn seam, trying to make the halves whole again. For a heartbeat they matched perfectly. Then they separated once more, refusing to stay mended. His throat tightened. "You're still here," he whispered to the air. "Both of you." Outside, snow began to fall, soft flakes turning the street into a quiet graveyard of sound. Ethan sat that way for hours. The light faded, the building emptied. Still he didn't move. When the heater clicked off, cold seeped into the room, steady as guilt. He didn't open the center the next morning, or the next. The phone rang until it stopped. A message light blinked red in the dark. He drifted through his house like someone recently evicted from his own body. Coffee went cold untouched. The clock above the sink kept ticking, stubbornly alive. At night, sleep refused him. The past, patient and cruel, returned with perfect clarity. He saw it again. The rain, the lamp, the courtyard, the girl kneeling in the dirt, the sound that wasn't quite crying and wasn't quite breath. He saw his own hands shaking, not from fear but from obedience. He stared at it until the lamp's light blurred in his eyes. Then he set the box on the table, opened a notebook, and began to write. I've spent years building a life out of silence. It felt safer that way. Safer for me. Safer for whoever might look into my face and see what I used to be. I didn't recognize you when you first walked in. I thought maybe you reminded me of someone. That's what I told myself. But the truth was louder than memory. I knew, before I allowed myself to know. The way the world tilted when you said your mother's name. The way the air left my lungs. I don't ask you to forgive me. I couldn't even pronounce the word right when I wrote it that night. I was 19. We were all terrified, pretending to be men. I watched things happen that should have ended with my own death. Instead, I lived. That was my first betrayal. I carried your mother's face in my head for years, her silence, her eyes, the way she refused to cry. I thought carrying her was penance, but maybe it was cowardice. I have carried you in my blood without knowing it. I have carried her in my soul without forgiving myself. If there is any justice, it's that you found me. If there is any mercy, it's that you walked away. Live, please live. Let me be the one who stays behind this time. Ethan. He folded the page, placed it in an envelope, but didn't seal it. He stared at his name written on the return corner and crossed it out. The house was silent except for the faint hiss of the wind at the window. He poured himself a drink, then another, until the glass trembled in his hand. He opened the back door. Snow drifted across the porch, thin as ash. He stood there, barefoot, the cold biting through his skin until it numbed thought. "I tried," he whispered. "I swear to God I tried." No one answered. Mai stayed away for 6 days. Each morning she woke expecting anger. Instead, she found exhaustion. Her body moved through small tasks like muscle memory, boiling water, folding laundry, staring at walls until they blurred. On the 7th day, she went to the river. The air was sharp, the surface frozen in parts. She watched a leaf glide along the edge of ice until it disappeared beneath. In her pocket, the photograph halves were folded together inside a handkerchief. She wanted to throw them away, but her hand refused. The weight of them was small, but it anchored her in a way nothing else could. She thought of her mother, how silence had been her only weapon, her only defense. For the first time, Mai understood it not as weakness, but as survival. She whispered, "Me, what would you have done?" The river didn't answer, but it kept moving. That was something. Ethan returned to the center on the 8th day. The woman at the front desk looked surprised to see him. "You look tired," she said gently. He smiled thinly. "I've been remembering." He went into his office and closed the door. The room smelled faintly of dust and paper. He stood there for a long time, then began cleaning. Stacks of files, boxes of tapes, books. Order was his last defense. When he finished, the desk was bare except for the envelope and the photograph. He placed them side by side, like evidence awaiting judgment. He thought of mailing the letter. Then he thought of flying instead. That night he packed a single bag. Mai found the letter 2 days later. The woman at the desk handed it to her, unsure. "He left this for you." The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakable. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. She read slowly, line by line, as if giving each word permission to exist. When she reached "I have carried you in my blood," she stopped breathing. Tears fell onto the paper, leaving small circles that bloomed and vanished. She folded it again, pressed it against her chest, and whispered, "You shouldn't have written this." But her voice broke on the word "shouldn't," and she knew she didn't mean it. She walked outside into the cold. The world had gone still. Snow muffled the sound of her steps. In the distance, a plane passed overhead, a faint hum fading toward the east. Ethan sat by the airplane window, the sky outside burning orange. Clouds parted, revealing the sea below, dark, infinite, and familiar. He reached into his coat pocket, touching the photograph one last time. He had not thrown it away after all. He couldn't. Some ghosts deserve a seat beside you. He looked down at the coastline as the plane descended. The green of Vietnam emerged through mist, soft and endless. He closed his eyes and whispered the words that had carried him here. "Forgive me, not because I deserve it, but because you deserve peace." As it drifted away, she whispered, "Go." The word sounded small, but it felt like release. She stayed until the last of the light left the sky. When she turned for home, her steps were lighter, though her heart was still heavy. Some weights, she thought, are meant to be carried, not as punishment, but as proof that we remember. And somewhere far above her, a plane cut through the clouds, moving toward dawn. When the wheels met the runway, the sound reached him like an echo that had traveled 25 years to arrive. He closed his eyes. The smell of jet fuel, heat, and humidity poured into the cabin. The past had a scent, and it was this. He walked through the airport without hurry. Banners fluttered, taxis honked. Travelers spoke in a language that used to terrify him. He caught fragments of words he still understood. Mua, song, nha, rain, river, home. Each syllable found a place in his chest and refused to leave. Outside, a driver held a sign with his name. Ethan nodded, and the man opened the car door with a polite bow. "Quang Tri?" the driver asked. "Yes," Ethan said softly. They drove north along the coast road. The sea kept pace beside them, blue and steady. Fields passed, palm, rice, cassava, each one stitched with smoke rising from cooking fires. Children waved, dogs barked at nothing. It looked ordinary, which somehow hurt more. The driver spoke little. Ethan didn't mind. He watched the land change, flat plains giving way to hills, the light bending through the mist. Every few miles the car hit a patch of old red dirt, and he'd see flashes of faces that weren't there anymore. By late afternoon the driver slowed. "The village, sir," he said. Ethan stepped out. The heat pressed against him, heavy and familiar. The air smelled of wet grass and wood smoke. The sound of crickets came first, then the river, a steady pulse beneath everything. The houses were new, smaller, built from brick instead of bamboo. The paths had changed, but the slope of the land had not. He knew, without needing to ask, where the old courtyard had stood. He followed the sound of the water until the trees opened, and there it was. A rebuilt house, modest, clean, a well standing beside a wall patched with moss. A single oil lamp sat on the step, its glass clear but unlit. He stopped at the gate and removed his hat. A woman sat beneath the shade of a tree, a bowl of water beside her. She looked up before he spoke. "Lan." Time had carved her face gently. The lines were there, but they were not cruel. Her hair was silver, her back still straight. She did not look surprised. Perhaps she had always known this day would come. "Ciao ba, Ethan Noino." The word felt fragile in his mouth. Lon studied him. The silence between them stretched thin, then settled. Finally she nodded. "You came back." "I had to." She motioned toward the step. "Sit." He obeyed. The ground was warm. The air between them held both recognition and refusal. Lon spoke first. "You look the same, only slower." "I feel slower." "What do you want here?" He hesitated. The truth was not complicated, but it was difficult to make small enough for language. To see. To ask nothing. To put something down. Lon's gaze didn't waver. "You cannot bury what the earth already took." "I know." "Then what is left to do?" "To stand where it happened," he said, "and not run this time." She looked past him, toward the river. "You still carry her picture?" He nodded. "I carried it longer than I should have." Lon rose. "Come." They walked in silence down the narrow path that led behind the house. The river opened before them, slow and brown, its surface glittering with the last light of the day. The air smelled of rain, even though the sky was clear. Lan stopped near a flat stone and faced the water. "This is where I used to wash clothes," she said. "That night I ran here. I thought water could hide sound." Ethan didn't answer. There was no answer that would not insult the memory. She turned to him. "You came to be forgiven?" "No," he said. "I came to remember." Lon studied him for a long moment. Then she sighed. "Remembering is easy. Living with it, that is the harder thing." She sat down on the stone, her hands resting on her knees. "I was angry for many years," she said quietly. "Angry at the soldiers, at the sky, at God, at myself. But anger is greedy. It eats everything, even the one who feeds it." She looked up at him. "You are still alive. So you have not finished paying." He nodded. "I never will." A sound came from the path behind them. Footsteps, light, measured. Lon didn't turn. She only said, "She is here." Mai appeared at the edge of the clearing. She stopped when she saw them, two figures framed by water and dusk. Ethan's breath caught. She looked different in this light, older maybe, or simply more whole. The wind moved her hair across her face, and for a moment he saw both women at once, the mother she came from and the daughter she had become. Mai didn't move closer. Her eyes met his. "You found her?" she said. "Yes." "And me." He nodded. "Yes." Lon stood and stepped aside, letting the river claim the space between them. The silence that followed was long, but not empty. I read your letter, Mai said finally. Her voice was steady. You wrote that you carried me in your blood. That isn't something a man writes by accident. I meant it, he said. I believe you, she said, but that doesn't change what happened. No, he said. It doesn't. She stepped closer until only the width of the river's breadth separated them. My mother never hated you, she said. She hated the night, the noise, the fear, but she never said your name with anger, only with silence. I didn't understand that until now. Lon spoke softly. The past is a fire that keeps burning if we keep standing too close. Mai turned to her. Then how do we leave it behind? Lan looked toward Ethan. We don't. We walk with it until it learns to quiet. Ethan lowered his head. If I could change what happened— You can't, Lon interrupted gently. The dead do not bargain. He nodded. Then maybe I can change what lives. Lan picked up a handful of soil and let it fall into the river. The grains scattered, disappeared. Everything returns, she said. The three of them stood together at the water's edge, three versions of the same wound, breathing the same air. Mai reached into her bag and took out a folded paper, the letter he had written, creased from being opened too many times. She held it out to him. I'm giving it back. Ethan hesitated. Why? Because it's not mine to carry, she said. You already have enough weight. He accepted it with both hands, bowing slightly without meaning to. Thank you. Don't thank me, she said. Just stop running. Lon glanced at the fading sky. It's time, she said. Come. They walked back toward the house. Dusk gathered around them like slow forgiveness. Crickets sang their blunt songs. In the distance, a dog barked, announcing nothing in particular. On the porch, Lon lit the old oil lamp. The flame flickered, then steadied. Light touched their faces, the same light that had once witnessed ruin. For a long while, no one spoke. Then Lon said quietly, Tomorrow we will burn incense at the place where it happened. Not for apology, for peace. Ethan nodded. Yes. Mai looked at him. After that? I go home, he said. If the world will have me. She studied him, her eyes unreadable. And if it won't? He smiled faintly. Then I'll keep walking until I find a place that doesn't remember my name. Lon poured tea into 3 small cups. Drink, she said. The day has worked hard. They sat together under the low roof, the lamp between them, the sound of the river beyond. No one said forgive. No one said forget. They drank in silence, and for the first time it didn't taste bitter. Morning arrived slow, like someone unsure if they were welcome. Mist clung to the paddies, and the sound of roosters broke gently through the air. The river still moved, its patience unchanged by forgiveness or the lack of it. Ethan woke early, before the first light. The small guest room smelled of bamboo mats and rain that hadn't fallen yet. Through the open window, he could see the outline of Lon's house against the pale sky. Smoke was already rising from the kitchen. Somewhere, water boiled. Life had begun, indifferent but kind. He sat up, buttoned his shirt carefully. His hands still trembled a little, but not as before. Outside he heard footsteps, Lon's steady, Mai's lighter, a rhythm that sounded almost familiar. When he stepped out, they were already waiting. Lon held a bundle of incense sticks. Mai carried a small bowl of rice and a white candle. No words, Lon said quietly. Just presence. He nodded. They walked together toward the edge of the old courtyard. The air smelled of soil and the sweetness of wet leaves. A light breeze stirred the smoke from Lon's stove behind them. They stopped in front of it. Lan knelt first, setting down the candle. She struck a match. The flame caught easily, trembling in the wind before deciding to stay. Ethan followed, awkwardly bending his knees until they remembered how to hold the ground. He felt the earth through his palms, warm, forgiving in ways language wasn't. Lon lit 3 sticks of incense and handed one to Mai, one to Ethan. Smoke rose between them, thin and fragrant. "Tell them," Lon said, "whatever you need to say." Ethan held the incense carefully. His breath came shallow. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, in a whisper almost carried away by the wind, "I am still here, and that is my apology." Lon closed her eyes. Mai bowed her head. The smoke curled upward, finding its own sky. No one cried. There was nothing left to cry for, only the quiet, only the air moving through old trees. When the incense burned down to ash, Lan gathered the remnants in her hand and released them into the breeze. They vanished like dust given permission. "It's done," she said. Ethan nodded. He felt lighter, but not cleaner. Redemption, he thought, was just another kind of burden, one that weighed less but lasted longer. They walked back to the house. Inside, breakfast waited. Simple, humble, steamed rice, dried fish, tea. They sat around the wooden table. The lamp from last night still stood nearby, unlit. Morning light filtered through the window instead. Lon served him first. The gesture was neither forgiveness nor hospitality. It was habit, the kind that endures because it once meant something. Ethan took a bite. The rice was plain, but it tasted real. Grain, heat, and time. He looked at the two women across from him, mother and daughter, and thought how extraordinary it was that they still existed, still shared the same air. Lon poured tea for everyone. "The river will flood soon," she said, as if the sentence were enough to keep the world ordinary. Mai nodded. "It always does." No one spoke for a while. The sound of spoons against bowls became the conversation. Ethan wanted to say something, but everything felt too large for words. Finally he said quietly, "Thank you for letting me be here." Lon met his eyes. "You are not a guest," she said. "You are a remainder. We all are." Mai looked down at her bowl. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Maybe remainders are what the world is made of." Ethan smiled faintly. "Then perhaps we've all survived the same war." When they finished eating, Lon cleared the table. Mai stood by the doorway, watching the morning unfold. Children running along the road, a dog chasing their laughter. It looked like any other day, and maybe that was the point. By noon, Ethan prepared to leave. He packed slowly, folding his few clothes with a reverence that felt misplaced but necessary. The letter Mai had returned still lay on the table beside his bed. He read it once more, then slipped it into his jacket pocket. Lon walked him to the road. The driver was already waiting. The sun had turned harsh, the air thick with dust. "Will you come back?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, I think this was the only way back." She studied him for a moment, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a single matchstick. "For the lamp," she said, "in case it forgets." He took it, nodding, unable to speak. Mai approached from the house, carrying a small cloth bag. "For your journey," she said. Inside was tea and dried fruit, simple gifts, fragile and human. He accepted it with both hands. "I don't deserve this," he said. "Neither do we," she replied, "but here we are." He smiled then, a quiet, broken smile that belonged to no particular time. "Take care of each other." They nodded. The driver started the engine. Ethan stepped into the car, hesitated, then rolled down the window. The last thing he saw was the two of them standing side by side, framed by dust and sunlight. Lon's hand on Mai's shoulder, the river behind them, endless. As the car pulled away, the wind caught the edge of his sleeve, lifting it slightly, as if even the air wanted one final touch. He returned to Oregon a month later. The days were shorter now, the sky flatter. Snow fell and didn't stay. He kept to himself. The Veterans Center had found a new director. The boxes he'd once guarded like relics were gone. His house smelled of cedar and rain again, but quieter this time. Most evenings he sat by the window drinking tea from the same cup he'd used at Lon's table. On the shelf beside him, the old photograph no longer existed. It had been buried beside the river where paper becomes soil. Only the lamp remained. He lit it sometimes when sleep refused him. The flame trembled, small but stubborn. The light filled the room, gold and forgiving, as if it had traveled across an ocean to find him again. One winter night he wrote something on a small piece of paper. The handwriting was slow, careful. He folded it once, set it beside the lamp, and went to bed. That was how they found him the next morning, peaceful, still, the lamp burned down to its last breath. On the table, under the soft ring of light, was the note, "Forgive me, not because I deserve it, but because you deserve peace." Back in Vietnam, the river rose with the rain. The fields filled, then emptied, as they always had. In the small house by the water, Lon and Mai kept the lamp near the window. They didn't light it often, but they never moved it either. Sometimes, when dusk fell just right, the glass caught the last sunlight and scattered it across the walls. For a few moments the room shimmered gold. Lon would look at it and say nothing. Mai would watch the reflection fade, then whisper softly, to no one in particular, "Peace." And the river, faithful as ever, carried the word away. When the flame began to waver, Lon placed the glass cover over it. The light softened to a small, steady glow. Outside, the sky turned violet. Inside, 3 shadows leaned together, and the air carried the faint smell of smoke and wet earth, the scent of something ending.